Well, hello everyone and welcome to Northshore Online. My name is Samantha. It is so good to have you here with us at Northshore this morning. We have got a great morning planned as always. We're going to get started with worship in just a moment. But before we do that, I would love it if you would say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from. How has your week been? And how can we be praying for you? This is an opportunity that we have every single Sunday to encourage each other, see how we can be praying for each other, especially during this series that we've been in called Let's Talk About It, where we've been talking about faith and mental health and just like the real things of life. So let us know if you feel comfortable in the chat how we can be praying for you and encouraging you this week. And if this is your first time joining us, we want to say a special welcome to you as well. Say hi, introduce yourself in the chat. We're just so glad that you're here. Well, as I said, we've got an amazing Sunday planned, awesome worship coming up, and Scotty's going to be continuing our message series. He's got a great message to share with us this morning. So thanks again for being here and welcome to Northshore Online.
Good morning and welcome to Northshore. We're so glad you're here this morning. If you're joining us online, we want to say welcome and we ask that you stand and worship with us together.
There is no shadow that has ever overcome your light, and there is no rival that could ever stand against your might. You've always been with us. Every battle you've already won. Oh, you've already won. There is no weapon that has ever left a mark on you, and there is no army with the power to conquer truth. You've always been with us. turn into praise. Shake off despair as I sing out your name. A victory dance, I will dance out in faith. I will crush disappointment and break every chain. Oh, all of my fear I will turn into praise. Shake off despair as I sing out your name. A victory dance, I will dance out in faith. I will crush disappointment and break every chain. Oh, all of my fear I will turn into praise. Shake off despair as I sing out your name. A victory dance, I will dance out in faith. I will crush disappointment.
Good morning, you guys. Thank you so much for being here today. You guys can go ahead and take your seats. Yeah, I love being able to be here and gather and worship together. If we haven't met yet, my name is Stephen Bolt. As I said, we're excited to spend some time here this morning. And I know when I woke up this morning, just seeing the news of another shooting that has happened down in California. And for those of you guys that haven't seen it yet, there was a shooting last night at a nightclub down there where 10 people lost their lives, and there was a few more that were injured and hurt, and obviously still a lot happening with that down there. But I just know that like when we come into church and we sing songs like that, it can feel like just there's this disconnect in my soul from what I see happening around me and what I feel coming in here, and how we can sing stuff like that and talk about the things we're going to talk about in the message. And I was just reflecting on why we gather here and what the purpose of all of this is, and even this conversation we've been in on faith and mental health. And I think especially if you're a Christ follower, you can just feel that disconnect of like knowing this is not how God intended the world to be. This is not how God intended us to live our lives when we see stuff like that. And so I'm grateful just to gather here and be able to pray and turn to God and stuff that feels like we can't change. We pray and we sing and we worship a God who can. So would you guys join me in prayer here? So Heavenly Father, we just come to you with broken hearts and questions, and a lot of times I know for me just I just don't know what to do. And God, I'm so grateful that you give us scripture where we can look back and see as evil and darkness came into the world, just how you call us to respond and how we can come to you and bring our desires and bring this brokenness that we feel. And God, just bring your presence into this world. And so God, I pray that, in this moment down in California, and frankly, we hear news like this all over the world. And so God, in those situations, God, just as you promised to be close to the brokenhearted, would you just do that today? Would you bring your presence into these spaces? Would you bring your people, the church, just around the brokenhearted, people that are waking up to a new reality this morning? Would you just rise up an army of Christ followers around them just to come and support and speak life and just be shoulders to lean on and cry on? And God, I just pray that you continue calling and challenging the church to be the church. A group of people that don't just come into these four walls and sing and come to you and pray, but God, we bring your presence into the world. God, on earth as in heaven, would you allow us to be vessels of heaven, just going out into the world, bringing your light and hope in every place that we walk into. Just know we pray, amen. This is why, honestly, like this, as I said, this series we're going through, this conversation on faith and mental health, why this is so important. I fully believe like this series, God was dreaming about years ago, and as we've been planning it as a team for months now, just thinking about, man, this is something our community needs, our church needs. And we've been talking about a lot of resources, whether it's the groups, the divorce care, if you're dealing with anxiety, depression, helping people get connected with resources to take their next steps in their mental health journeys and in their relationships with Jesus. And one thing I just wanted to clarify, we've been talking about if you need someone to talk to at any point through this series, you can just text that reach out to 97,000. And that's something that we're doing, just so we as a church can take a step in that journey. But because of just the ridiculous generosity of this church, that's something we're able to offer to the community. Like, this isn't something, as people are watching online from all over the country, this isn't just for these four walls. This is for people who just need some help to be able to text that number. And we've been able to help people get plugged in with those groups. And again, just because this is a ridiculously generous church, we're able to partner with an organization and offer a month of free counseling to help them get started on that process. That's not a normal thing. This is making a huge difference in the world around us. And so honestly, for those of you that feel like there's a step for you to take, please take advantage of that. Just reach out to 97,000. If you know anyone that needs help, they can do that as well. And just thank you for giving to make that possible. It's incredible the difference that's making. And another resource that I've loved getting to be a part of since I started coming to Northshore and see is this thing that we call Alpha. It's a place where people who have big questions about faith, God, the meaning of life, can just come, have dinner, watch a short video, and then just have a really open, honest conversation about what they believe and what Scripture says. And so, it's an incredible ministry we do here. And we actually found someone who is willing to come and share a little bit of their story and what that impact was like for them. So go ahead and check this out.
My name is Dr. Isabelle Miller, and I'm from France, so I hope that you understand my accent when I speak English. I am a professor at the university. I teach anthropology, so I like very much cultures and biocultural anthropology, so I learn a lot about evolution. And so this is when I start to have some questions, and I'm not sure how to deal with God, and then evolution. And so I'm trying to put those things together. I came to Alpha because I had a neighbor that just lived across the street from my driveway. And then one day she said, "Do you want to come to the Easter service with me?" I said, "Sure." And then it was pretty nice. So then she said, "Do you want to come to Alpha session?" I said, "Sure." So that's the way I ended up going to Alpha. What was really, really, really good is that you could just say anything you want. There was no criticism. You could just express yourself. You could ask questions, and they were always there to accept you. A big question that I have asked many times, and because I'm from France and Europe, it was just like, well, God, if God is there, how come there are all these wars? Why do we have this war between Russia and Ukraine? That's really something that's still a problem, but I'm trying to understand. I guess I still haven't an answer, and I'm still, I don't know where to go, so I need help. So that's why I think it's really good that I keep either Alpha or something else. Unfortunately, I got divorced, and that was like the black sheep in France. So for me to go to Alpha and just be able to open up and talk about different things and just not being judged and criticized, that was wonderful. And I just hope I can go on and doing something with Northshore to be able to still ask questions, try to understand things, to get closer to God.
Yeah, so cool. And I'm so grateful for her willingness just to share the impact of that. And again, there's two things I want to point out on that. One was just, if you are asking those questions, take this opportunity. It starts on Tuesday. It's a great environment, just low-key, no pressure, to ask some of those questions and process that. And a second group is maybe that's not you, but you know someone who would benefit from that. It's an easy invite. I promise you won't regret it. The difference it can make in someone's life is profound. So to take some next steps, I want to encourage you guys, everyone in the room here, there's a connection card either in the seat back in front of you. You can go ahead and take that out right now. And on there, you can fill out your name, a little bit of other information. And on the back there, you'll see a checkbox that says, I have questions about faith. If you're online, you can scan this QR code. If you want to get signed up for Alpha or just get more information on it, you can just check that box that says, I have questions about faith. And someone from our team will reach out. And here's the other thing. If there's a name that came to mind, think about how easy it was. Someone walked across the street and just asked Dr. Miller if she wanted to come. And she says, sure. I love just the simplicity of like how much we can work up what that invite will look like in our mind. She's like, sure, yeah, I'd love to go. So if you would be willing to, if there's someone whose name popped into your head, would you write that on this card? We want to be praying for you this week as you're just processing it, inviting that person again. The difference that can make in their life is profound. So you can write that on the card. We'll collect these on the way out. And if this is your first time here, you can let us know as well. We'd love to get to know you. Well, you guys go ahead and stand back up if you're able. We're going to continue in worship. Got a great rest of our morning plan. Thank you guys again for being here. Let's continue worshiping together.
Followers of Jesus, we have hope. Let's sing of that hope together. Christ is my firm foundation. He's the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. That I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? He won't. Sing with me that I still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense, so I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I build my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would he fail now? He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. No, he won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. Christ is my firm foundation. He's the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. No, I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he fail now? Come on, church. He won't. No, he won't. We believe he won't fail. No, he won't fail. Oh, you are faithful, God. Never leave us or forsake us. Open our hearts to you today. Sing, rain came, and rain came when blew. My house was built on you, and I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. Rain came when blew. My house was built on you. I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. Rain came when blew. My house was built is so good to sing that truth with all of you today. I have no idea exactly where each of you are at, joining us online. But guess who does know? God knows. He knows exactly where you're at. He knows exactly what you need. He loves you no matter how you're feeling today, whether you believe every single one of the words we just sung, or whether you're like, I'm just not sure, or I'm not feeling it, or I'm not sure that reconciles with my life. God is here. He loves each and every one of us. We can let that guard down. We can invite him in to work and speak to us today. So I just invite you to do that today. We don't have to pretend. We're here. God is here. Let's do this together. Can we lean in? Can we lean in together today? All right. All right, hey, we have something awesome coming up next week that we want to share with you. Go ahead and take your seats. Let's watch this together.
Hey everyone, Brennan McDonough here, and on June 30th, 2013, I lost 19 of my brothers fighting a wildfire in Yarnell, Arizona. It was a tragedy that led me back to addiction, depression, and PTSD. I was at my rock bottom, and I didn't see a way out nor a way to recover from it. On January 29th, I'm excited to be joining you at Northshore Church for a conversation about community and how my faith would restore my life in a way that I could never imagine. I believe that no matter what you're going through, God wants to do it for you, and I can't wait to spend this time with you.
Well, thanks, Brendan, and we are so excited that you're going to be here in this place with us next Sunday, so you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a chance to just really dive deep into questions and an experience that was traumatic and painful and led to great brokenness, but then great healing. And you may not have his exact story, but I can tell you this, you will be inspired by it and it will connect to your story in some way. And for all the guys in the room, we're having a special event this Saturday night so that he wants to come and just sort of have an open conversation, back and forth dialogue with the men in our community. So I want to encourage you on the 28th, guys, be there, bring a friend. It's time for many of us, honestly, some of you just know you need to have a more honest conversation about what's happening in your life. And so I just want to encourage you to be there with that as well on the 28th. So as many of you know, or some of you know, or maybe you don't know, because maybe it's your first time, and it's your first time, I'm so glad you're here. But a little bit about my story. I grew up, not in this part of the country, but I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And one of the hallmarks of Southern culture where I grew up was a rite of passage called cotillion. Anyone ever heard of cotillion? Anyone know? Yep. Anyone ever been through cotillion? Because we have people that can pray for you after the service if you need it. It's a program designed to teach young people about, social graces and table etiquette and, ballroom dancing. And it's very formal. Like the boys, we had to wear, coats and ties. The girls had to wear dresses and I kid you not, like white gloves. And some very evil person decided the best time to do this was during middle school when everybody's at their peak of social awkwardness, right? And for me, that awkwardness was compounded by the fact that I was shorter than pretty much all the girls in my grade. In fact, I remember the director of my cotillion class telling me to stand up straight. And I remember thinking to myself, I am standing up straight. I'm just really short, come on. Well, one year at the Christmas ball, kind of the end of the year at the Christmas ball, when all the parents were there smiling and watching and taking pictures, there was this dance where all the boys were on one side of the room and the girls were on the other side of the room, and the girls were asked to walk across the floor and ask a boy to dance, which, had to take great courage on their part, but all I remember was standing there for what felt like an eternity, watching one girl after another walk across the floor and not pick me. And to make you feel so bad, don't you? Oh, thank you for your little taste of pity on my life this morning. To make matters worse, when I finally got picked, it was by the tallest girl in the room. I mean, she was 6'8", it was wild. She had to lean down to reach my shoulders. And I was so embarrassed as we danced on that dance floor. I just felt like I wanted to sink into the ground and disappear. Thankfully, no one could see me in the crowd out there because I was pretty far down there, but I just wanted to disappear. Now, I'll just have you know, I went on to recover from that night. I got out of middle school. I eventually got taller, not a lot taller, but I got taller. But I can still remember feeling not just awkward or embarrassed, though I felt those things, but almost ashamed of who I was. I didn't just not like that moment I was in. Part of me didn't like me. Now, since that time, I've learned two things about that kind of feeling, this feeling of I don't like me, or I feel ashamed of me, or I just want to disappear like into the floor. And one is that feeling doesn't just go away when you get older. And two, it is a really common mental health challenge for lots of people in our day, young and old, across cultures and places. In fact, research says that 85% of Americans today suffer from some form of low self-esteem or low self-worth or negative self-regard, if you will. And so today, as we continue this conversation, this series on faith and mental health, I want to talk about that feeling, that dynamic, this sense of lacking or low self-worth or shame in our lives. Because it's not only one of the most prevalent mental health struggle in our day, it can show up in our lives in so many ways. Some of you will recognize some of these. For some of you, it's being overly sensitive to criticism. Like it really stings when you feel criticized, or maybe you assume that people are always criticizing you. For others, it's lacking confidence that you could succeed or become someone or that you matter in life. For some of you, it's struggling with negative feelings about yourself or feelings of being inferior or less valuable than the people around you or other people you know. Now, it's true, some people have, in some ways, the opposite problem. They think too highly of themselves, and yet sometimes that confidence or even arrogance is actually just a veil, a cover, trying to compensate for a lack of confidence or self-worth inside. Which means, and here's what I want you just to be aware of, and you all know this at some level, but just to remember, you can look really confident on the outside and feel really worthless on the inside. And there are a lot of reasons people have experiences or feelings like this. It can be a byproduct of growing up in an unloving or abusive environment or experiencing bullying or things like that. It can emerge from struggles in your life to succeed or achieve, whether it's vocationally or academically or socially or athletically. And it's a natural byproduct of comparing ourselves to other people, what they have, what they look like, who they're with. Which, by the way, this comparison game that we do is exacerbated by our compulsion or addiction to screens and social media. This is what every teenager is doing when they're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram. By the way, it's also what every adult is doing when they're scrolling through those things as well. We're comparing ourselves constantly to other people, just fueling this shame and low self-worth. Not only that, people with low self-esteem are more likely to experience other mental health challenges like anxiety or depression, and mental health challenges that we face can fuel low self-esteem. For example, some of you aren't just battling depression in your life, you also battle the sense of feeling ashamed that you're depressed. Some of you aren't just wrestling with chronic anxiety in your life, you feel ashamed that you're anxious. And depending on your background, for some of you, Christianity or church might even feel like part of the problem, right? Some of you were raised in a church that felt judgmental or critical of other people, or you were presented with a version of Christianity that equated loving God with not liking yourself. Like those two things were kind of, if you love God, you got to kind of not like you. And if that's you, I'm so glad that you're here today or that you're joining us online. I can't promise this will be a good message, but I can promise it will not be that message because that wasn't Jesus' message. But before we get to that, I want to take you back to the life of this famous prophet in ancient Israel that we can read about in the Old Testament in the Bible. This man named Elijah, whose story we're walking through each of the weeks of this series, who had this, if I want to put it frankly, a mental and emotional breakdown before us in the Bible. I mean, sadly for Elijah, it was written down in the Bible. And thankfully for us, we have somewhere to go, somewhere we can turn when we feel like we're going to lose it, especially when it comes to issues of self-esteem, self-worth, and shame. So here we go. This again, same text, same story. We're going to be diving deeper, new layers every week. This is from 1 Kings 19. Elijah, if you remember, was threatened. His life was threatened by this king named Ahab and Ahab's wife Jezebel, and he's on the run. The text says he was afraid and he ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. Remember that little moment. And while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord. I wish I could have been there to hear the tone in his voice. Take my life, he said. I am no better than my ancestors. Now, I just want to pause here at this moment in the story for just a moment and have you notice what Elijah doesn't say here. He doesn't say, I'm facing the same kind of struggles as my ancestors, or I'm walking through the same challenges as my ancestors. He says, I am no better than my ancestors. In other words, I am somehow inadequate or inferior or unworthy. Now again, we've talked about this before. The Bible was written long before the age of modern psychology, so you won't find words like self-esteem or self-image in Scripture, but the Bible talks a lot about shame. And shame, just so you know, at its core, is a feeling of unworthiness. Shame is feeling not worthy of love, not worthy of respect, not worthy of connection, not worthy of belonging. And it's not the same thing as guilt. We feel guilt for what we do. We feel shame for what we think we are. And some of you know this place, don't you? Some of you know someone who lives in the shadow of shame. And it's not just painful, it's deeply isolating. In fact, when someone is struggling with shame or self-worth, the pattern is to try to isolate or hide from other people, just like Elijah did in the story, remember? Before he goes into the wilderness, he leaves his servant behind. He doesn't want anyone to see what he's about to experience or go through. The problem is hiding doesn't help our shame, it adds to it. It creates this kind of vicious cycle of shame and isolation where the more shame I feel, the more I want to isolate myself. And the more I isolate myself, the more ashamed I feel. And some of you just can't get off this cycle, can you? And this cycle, this spiral can lead to the darkest place a human being can go. Take my life, Elijah says. No reason for me to go on living. The world would be a better place without me in it. And maybe you've had a thought like that. Or maybe someone you know or someone you love has struggled with that kind of thought, that kind of fear, that kind of shame. Just so you know, we can speak honestly about this in a place like this. Suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation is becoming more and more common in our day. Rates of suicide in our country are up. They're going up over 30% per year right now. And the most likely age for these suicidal thoughts and ideation, you know what the most likely age range for that is? 18 to 25. And it's happening younger and younger and younger. And I know we mentioned this last week, but I'm going to come back to it because it's so important. There is now an emergency helpline for anyone who feels like their life is not worth living. You can call this 3 numbers 988 anytime. And here's what's also encouraging. I also read this week that 98% of people who call this number get the help they need, the support they need on the call, which means it can be a life-saving moment for you or someone you love. But there's something else you need to know about this shame, this feeling of worthiness, this feeling of worthlessness that can take someone down a road to this deepest, darkest place. Here's the thing you need to know. It's all based on a lie. Did you know that? It's all based on a lie, and it's right here in front of us in Elijah's story. Just look at the statements he makes. These are all the statements he makes throughout the story. We didn't get to all of them in the text we read, but this is everything he says. I have had enough, Lord. It's true. He had had enough. He says, I've been very zealous for you. It's true. He had been zealous for God in his life. He says, the Israelites have rejected you. That was true. Many Israelites had turned from God. He said, I am the only one left. It was true. Many other prophets have been killed or run out of town. And he said, now they are trying to kill me too. Absolutely true. Everything he said was factually true until we get to this one statement that he makes. I am no better than my ancestors. And here's the lie. Because it's here that Elijah moves from a factual statement about his circumstances to a subjective assessment of his worth. Do you see it? He moves from factual statements about what's happening in his life, just his situation, to a subjective and quite negative assessment of his worth. And friends, we do this all the time in our lives. A few examples I can just walk through that we have in our lives. So you might go, fact, situation, I lost my job. It's a factually true statement. But then we move to assessment of my worth. I must be a failure. Or fact, I'm still single in my life. And then we move from a description of reality to an assessment of our worth. I must be unattractive or undesirable. Another example, fact, I feel lonely or depressed. Just a true statement of how I feel, assessment of worth. I must not matter. Are you with me? You see how this works? We make this leap from our situation and a factual description of it to a subjective assessment of our worth. And friends, this is not just a matter of psychology. There is a spiritual issue here. In fact, more than that, there is a demonic issue in this because shame is the work of the devil himself. Some of you know the story in the Bible of how the devil tempted the very first human beings to turn against God. And when they did, they ran and hid from God. Shame always leads us to run and hide, doesn't it? And so God calls out, where are you? You remember the story? And the man said, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And then God's response, this is so important, God says, who told you that you were naked? In other words, whose voice are you listening to? What lies are you believing? See, whenever we feel shame, for whatever reason, God comes to us with the same question. Who told you you don't matter? Who told you that you were inadequate? What lies are you believing? Because here's the truth. Yes, Adam and Eve sinned, and yes, sin has real consequences, but here's the truth. Being guilty of sin does not make you unworthy of love. Being stuck in addiction does not make you unworthy of love. Going through a divorce does not make you unworthy of love. Being depressed or anxious does not make you unworthy of love. Friends, there is nothing you can do that makes you unworthy of God's love because you are a child of God. You have been fearfully and wonderfully made. And even when we turned against God, God didn't say, well, now you're worthless. Just the opposite. He said, you're now worth dying for. Just to try to illustrate this for you, think about the impact of inflation in our day. Everything costs more, right? Cost of airfare is up, the cost of insurance is up, utilities is up, groceries are way, way up. In fact, just this past week, I was at the store and I saw a dozen eggs for $9. $9. Is there like lottery tickets inside there? Like what's inside those eggs? I just wanted to break one open and see like what would come out of this egg. Is it like a magic egg? So I had to stop myself and ask myself, are these eggs really worth $9? And to my surprise, the answer was yes. Why? Because that's how much I paid for them, right? I don't know why I paid that much for them, but that's what I paid. So what are eggs worth? Whatever I am willing to pay for them. So what are you worth? Whatever God was willing to pay for you. And what did God pay for you? Everything. Everything. That's why the Apostle Paul once wrote these remarkable words: you are not your own. You don't decide your worth. You were bought with a price. That's how you determine your worth. What did God pay? What did it cost? Doesn't matter how I feel. Doesn't matter about my shame. Doesn't mean it's not painful and real, but it does not determine my worth. And yet it's so easy, right, to find our worth in so many lesser things: our work, our achievements, our reputation. I've certainly experienced that in my own life. Some of you may not know this, but if you don't know, people tend to have lots of opinions about how churches should go. Did you know that? And sometimes those opinions get expressed in really healthy and productive ways. And sometimes, maybe not so much, right? Sometimes they get expressed in anonymous notes, angry emails. Sometimes people leave cards, articles, stuff at the front desk when nobody's looking. They'll drop something off, so nobody sees them, like, leave the note for me. The problem is, and just a little piece of advice, we have security cameras in the lobby. We know who you are, okay? And we're judging you too, okay? We're not. I don't say that to add shame to your life. That's not the purpose of the comment. The purpose is, or the point is, whenever I feel criticized for something, there's a voice inside that whispers, see, you're a failure. See, God made such a mistake when he called you to be a pastor. And it's in that moment I have to make a choice. Whose voice am I going to believe? The voice of God who calls me his beloved, or the voice of the enemy who says, you're worth nothing more than what's the words on that card? And that's the question Elijah has to answer as well. Whose voice are you going to believe? Which brings us to the good news in Elijah's story. God speaks when he feels shame. When Elijah was in that cave, the text says, the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Pause. Whenever you feel shame, God is going to speak. His word enters in. Whenever we feel shame or self-doubt, God is going to speak. And look at what God says next. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And then the voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? So what does God's response to Elijah show us about how he wants to heal our shame and self-worth? Well, first, and really important here, the first part of the answer is, we can't do this alone. God comes to Elijah and he says, what are you doing here alone in this cave? Not once, but twice, Like whatever's going on, like why are you actually by yourself in this cave? You do not belong here. Pointing him back to people, community, which what Elijah does next in the story goes back to Israel. He points back to community, and he points us back there as well. You see, whenever you're struggling with shame or self-doubt or self-worth, you need people, you need community, you need support. For some of you, that means today is a day to get out your phone and call or text that friend that you need to talk to. Or to reach out to that pastor or counselor, make that appointment you know you need to make. Or to get in a life group or a support group. Because you can't walk this road alone. And if you're not sure who to reach out to, we've named this before, just text the words reach out to 97000 anytime. And we can follow up with you and help you take a next step, because you can't beat shame alone. Alone is part of the problem. But, and it's really important, Elijah's next step is not just relational. And this is where so much of the wisdom we hear in our culture will run thin. And it's not that we don't need people or help or counselors or voices, but the answer is not just relational or psychological, it's also spiritual. How do I know? Because God told Elijah to go out of the cave and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord. Why? Because no lie can stand in his presence. That's why God came walking in the garden with Adam and Eve. It's why God passed by the cave with Elijah. It's why God came into the world in the person of Jesus, because in his presence, no lie can stand. So whenever you're in a place where you can't distinguish the lies from the truth, it's our first step, you need to stand in God's presence. Because his presence is what begins to heal us of our shame. And I love the text says stand. Not lie on the ground or curl up in a ball. Part of our shame puts us spiritually like in the constant fetal position where we just feel weak and helpless. And God says, stand up. Boldly, confidently in my presence. I love how the writer of Hebrews once described this dynamic. He says, let us approach God's throne of grace with what? Confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Friends, I don't know what lies are imprisoning you today, but I know the only way out is to come out of the cave and stand in the presence of the Lord. By the way, it's why we stand and worship in this place every week. It's not just because we have an incredible music team, though they're an incredible group of people. It's to invite you out of the prison of your shame and into the very throne room of God. And I know, it can be a challenge. I know we can all worry about what other people think about us. What are they gonna say or think or feel? But here's the thing, you have one audience when you're in this room. And it is not your spouse or your friends or your kids or your parents. It's God. And he will call you out of that cave and say, stand in my presence and receive the worth you have as a child of God. You get to stand in his presence. And not only that, we stand in his presence. A second part of the step, we need to listen to God's words. God doesn't just pass by Elijah and keep moving. He speaks to Elijah. And I love this. The text says that after the fire came a gentle whisper. And then it says Elijah heard the whisper and came out of the cave. And then God said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Which means God whispered something to Elijah and we have no idea what he said. He whispered something to draw him out of that cave. Maybe he said, I believe in you, Elijah. Maybe he said, you are precious to me, Elijah. Maybe he said, don't you know that you are a son of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? We don't know. All we know is that it was just what Elijah needed to hear to come out of that cave. And here's the truth, friends. I believe God has a word, a whisper he wants to share with you that's just for you. A word, a whisper that can bring you out of that lie, out of that cave, out of that shame that you've been living in if you're just willing to listen. I'll be honest, some of the most life-changing moments in my life have come when someone was praying for me and the Spirit of God whispered a word or an image into my life that was just for me. I had this happen recently. A counselor in my life was praying over me and God spoke directly into an area that was profoundly shameful in my life because God always whispers truth to our shame. And in a moment when we take time to pray and sing, I hope some of you will come forward because God has a whisper for you today as well, if you will just open your ears to hear it. Before we do that, there's one more step. We need to stand in God's presence. We need to listen to his words. And then finally, we need to remember God's love. The reason why God came and found Elijah in that cave is the very same reason Jesus came into the world to find you, and it's love. Friends, the remedy for self-hate is not just self-love, it's God's love. Love that was so great that he came into the world and died on a cross, and not just to pay for our sin. As the writer of Hebrews once said, Jesus endured the cross, what? Scorning its shame. which means he looked at every lie, every shame, every dark thought about us being worthless or unworthy, and he looked and he despised that thought. He scorned that thought. He says, your shame belongs in hell with the creature who created it. Because Jesus only knows one posture towards you, and it's love. And here's the amazing thing about his love. Not only can his love heal our shame, his love has this miraculous way of showing up just when we need it. Quick story and I'll close. A friend of mine told me the story about a woman he knows named Carol. And Carol lost two of her closest friends to suicide in about a 6-month period. And naturally, she was just devastated by the loss. So she prayed to God, God, use me to help someone else who's struggling or desperate in this way. Well, a few weeks later, Carol was making a phone call and she accidentally dialed the wrong number and called someone who lived across the country on the East Coast. And the woman who answered sounded a little bit distraught. So Carol talked to her for just a few moments. They talked just for a few moments, talking together. And at the end of that conversation, the woman whose name was Sue said, hey, Carol, can we talk again? And so they did. And then they talked again, and they talked again, and they talked again. Every week for about a year, they spoke over the phone, talking about life and their past and their pain. About a year later, Carol had a business trip to the East Coast, so she finally had this opportunity to actually sit down over dinner and meet Sue, who'd become a friend to her. And as they were having dinner and talking, Sue got really emotional and she went on to break down in tears and told Carol that about a year earlier, she got so down on herself, so convinced that she didn't matter, that she had got in her car and was driving to a bridge to jump off of it. But somewhat ironically, thankfully, her car ran out of gas. She had to get towed. She ended up back at her house feeling isolated, alone, in the dark, in her shame. And that's when her phone rang. And guess who it was? It was a wrong number named Carol. And Sue just wanted to tell Carol, thank you. Because it was because of our conversations that I began to have hope in my life. It was because of those conversations that led me to a nearby church. It was because of our conversations that led Sue to faith in Jesus. Because it was through Carol that Jesus came to Sue and said, what are you doing here? Alone in this cave in the dark. Don't you know you are a child of God? Don't you know you are the daughter of the King of Kings? Don't you know that God paid the ultimate price, everything for you? So friends, I don't know what shame you carry. Maybe you've always struggled with feeling less than or not worthy or not good enough. Maybe you've been rejected or bullied or abused or dismissed. Maybe you've been hiding from others, afraid of what they might think if they really knew you. I don't know what cave you're in, but here's what I know. The cave doesn't determine your worth. The cross does. Which means you are not worthless. You are worthy of everything God has, and everything he has is yours. You are worthy of the pain and sacrifice he made to come into the world, and he experienced being told he didn't matter, getting laughed at, rejected. You are worth all those things. But that also means you cannot heal your shame without putting your faith in him, without exchanging all the lies for this amazing truth that he paid the price for you. So here's what we're gonna do. Normally we take a moment to pause, look down, almost be in that posture where some of us can almost feel more of our shame, kind of looking down, looking low. Here's what I wanna do. If you're able, I want you to stand. Everybody stand up. If you're watching online, you can stand as well. And we are gonna stand and boldly declare that we don't find our worth in the cave. We find it at the cross where God paid the ultimate price for us. We're gonna sing a song where we get to declare that. And if you don't know Jesus and you wanna profess faith in him today, the words of the song are your prayer, okay? This is your prayer of saying yes to him. And if you need prayer, I'm gonna invite the prayer team to come on forward. These two sides of the room, we'll have folks online that will pray with you. If you wanna hear God's whisper into your shame, come forward today and let someone pray for you and be that voice for you today. And last thing, when we get to the words of the chorus and we get to those words that say, I'm a child of God, yes, I am, I want you to sing it like you mean it, boldly before the throne of grace. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's sing.
Take a couple minutes, friends, and we're going to invite God to whisper to us. We're going to open up our hearts and our ears, and we're going to say, God, do you have something you want to say to me today? We just want to give each and every one of us space to do that, and we're going to keep singing.
Guys, thank you so much for being here today. And just the prayer, is that there is stuff that we have carried with us for a long time, and I just sense like God is breaking through some of those walls today. So if that is something that has been put on your heart that God has, just revealed to you to get prayer for, or just to hear his voice on, again, don't miss this opportunity. Come forward. We'll have people up here all throughout the end of the service. And if you're online, please let us know in the chat. We have people that would love to pray with you today. Well, again, before we head out, make sure to join us back here next week. So excited for Brennan, who's going to be coming and guest speaking. If you are a man who just wants a little bit of extra time to get to know his story, ask questions in a much smaller environment, we'll be doing something on Saturday night, the 28th at 6:30. You can find out more info at northshore.church. So make sure and check that out. And again, if you need prayer, don't miss this opportunity. Please come forward. We would love to chat with you. Thank you guys so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you guys next time.